No one expected that the very creatures deemed untamable could become the final line between life and death. A female Border Patrol agent, once a Delta Force operative, was betrayed and left to die, hanging helplessly off a cliff. No one came, no signal, no hope. Until a band of wild Mustangs appeared. And what happened next would forever change the way we see these instinct-driven horses. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. No one in the Border Patrol station could recall precisely when they first heard the name Lena Hart. She arrived without fanfare, carrying only a duffel bag and the haunted look of someone who had seen too much. In hushed tones, some of her new colleagues referred to her as the Ghost Ranger, a nod to her silent demeanor and the fact that she could slip in and out of the station with little notice. Yet behind that distant gaze lay a history unlike any other. Lena Hart had once been Sergeant Lena Hart of the Delta Force, a highly skilled operative who had served tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. She was known for her unyielding focus under fire, her ability to adapt to impossible conditions, and a string of commendations that would make any officer proud. But the final mission she undertook overseas had gone terribly wrong. Betrayed from within, she watched her entire unit fall apart in a matter of hours. The survivors were few. Lena often wondered if it would have been kinder had she not been one of them. After she returned stateside, it became painfully clear that she no longer belonged in a world of high-stakes special operations. She carried the nightmares home in the form of constant flashbacks, faces of lost comrades, echoes of gunfire, and the suffocating guilt of having lived when so many died. Faced with those memories, Lena did the only thing she thought she could do. She removed herself from the frenzy of city life. She avoided big crowds, big lights, and big expectations. So when a chance emerged to join the U.S. Border Patrol in the southern deserts of Arizona, she accepted without question. Her reasoning was simple. In these remote areas, if people died, it was real. They wouldn't become an administrative statistic that vanished among countless reports. They were human lives, no illusions, no cover-ups. Out in the desert, the truth was as stark as the relentless sun. Her initial days at the station were quiet. She would wake before dawn, run laps around the dusty perimeter, and end each day poring over topographical maps of the region. Few tried to befriend her. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, and there was a certain finality in her expression that told others not to pry. Still, her commanding officer, Supervisor Neil Carver, had no complaints about her professionalism. "I hear she used to be Delta," one of the younger agents whispered. "Is that really true?" Lena never confirmed or denied such rumors. She simply performed her duties with a precision that felt almost military, never once discussing her past or her nightmares. Early one morning, Supervisor Carver summoned Lena to his cramped office. His voice was unusually soft, as if he were trying to keep the conversation private. She stood there, back straight, ignoring the squeak of the worn leather chair when Carver gestured for her to sit. She chose to remain standing. "There's a route out in El Silencio," Carver began. "We've had some odd chatter about possible movement in that area. Nothing definitive, just rumors. Maybe smugglers, maybe nothing. You think you can check it out on your own?" Lena gave a curt nod. A solo patrol was hardly an unusual assignment for her. She actually preferred it, free from the chit-chat and second-guessing that often came with partnered missions. Carver fixed her with a pointed look. "It's your call, Hart. You can wait for backup if you want." She studied his face. Something in his tone felt off, but she brushed it aside. "I'm fine on my own," she said firmly, her voice low. "Just give me the updated map and any intel you have." Half an hour later, she was strapping her gear onto a desert-ready motorcycle. The sun had barely cleared the horizon, yet the air already carried the promise of brutal heat. She packed a canteen, an M4 carbine with a shortened barrel, a sidearm at her waist, and a small bag containing binoculars, extra magazines, and a satellite radio for emergency communication. As she rode off toward El Silencio, the desert wind whipping across her cheeks, she felt an odd sense of calm. The emptiness of the land mirrored the emptiness she'd long carried within. El Silencio was notorious among the Border Patrol for its unforgiving terrain, jagged rock formations, endless dunes of shifting sand, and valleys where scorching wind whipped dust devils into mesmerizing spirals. The region was difficult for vehicles to traverse, which made it ideal for traffickers seeking hidden routes. Lena had been briefed that morning about possible suspicious movement, but details were sparse. merely rumors of footprints or tire marks that vanished among the dunes. She spent the first few hours scouting from one vantage point to another. Nothing stirred except for the occasional desert fox or a hawk riding invisible thermals. The radio crackled once or twice with station updates, but everything sounded routine. She dismounted her bike near the remains of an old supply outpost, just a few rusted metal sheets and a collapsed shelter that might once have held water barrels or basic rations. As Lena moved in, she noticed footprints in the sand. Not fresh, but not completely eroded by the wind either. She crouched low, running her gloved fingers across the indentations. They looked like boot prints, possibly 3 or 4 pairs, heading deeper into the scrub. Alarm bells went off in her mind, but she couldn't be certain if they were cartel or simply local wanderers. She decided to investigate further. The next moments happened so fast they blurred. She turned back to retrieve her bike, only to feel a sharp blow slam into the back of her skull. A flash of white exploded in her vision. Her knees buckled. Her last conscious thought was the shock of having her guard down. Then darkness consumed her. When she opened her eyes, Lena found herself on her knees, arms pinned painfully behind her, stripped of her weapons and gear. 3 men in balaclavas hovered nearby, speaking Spanish in clipped, mocking tones. She glimpsed her M4 and sidearm tossed aside. The men wore mismatched clothing, cargo pants, bandanas, scuffed boots. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, circled her slowly like a predator measuring prey. "The bitch from the Border Patrol," he said with a short laugh. "Look at her. She's not even as tough as they say." Lena clenched her jaw, her mind raced, scanning for ways out, but they had her pinned, hands restrained with zip ties. A wave of dizziness rolled through her from the blow to her head. One of the masked men leveled a pistol at her forehead. She didn't flinch, just locked eyes with him. In that moment she remembered the mission overseas. How betrayal tasted, how it felt to realize you had been set up. Yet she also remembered she had lived through that, and for reasons she still didn't fully grasp, she intended to live through this as well. The tall man, apparently their leader, reached out and pushed the pistol down. "No," he said in Spanish. "Shooting her would be too easy and too noisy." He spoke with a calculated calm that made Lena's blood run cold. "We want her gone, no body to find, no bullet to trace. Let time kill her instead." The one with the pistol sneered. "What do you suggest, boss?" The leader glanced around, squinted at the jagged rock formations in the distance. A cruel smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Find a good spot to dangle her over a cliff," he said. "Let her die slowly. Let the sun have her." They dragged Lena across the sands, ignoring her attempts to struggle against the zip ties. Her mind whirled. Where was her backup? Why had no one responded to the scuffle? Pieces started clicking into place. These men had known exactly where to find her and how to neutralize her quickly. She blacked out again when one slammed a fist into the side of her head. Harsh sunlight beat against her eyelids, reviving her to a new horror. She was no longer on solid ground. She blinked rapidly, seeing only the endless blue of the sky. Gradually she became aware of the abrasive rope digging into her midsection. Her arms were pinned behind her back by another binding. Her entire torso was pressed forward, suspended somehow. Then she realized she was hanging off a cliff. A glance downward made her stomach lurch. The rock face plummeted 30 meters or more, a raw drop ending in jagged stones. The rope around her waist was secured to a protruding boulder overhead. If that rope broke, or even frayed too much, there would be nothing to stop her body from smashing against the rocks below. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Every slight breeze caused her to sway, each swing of her body rubbing the rope against sharp outcroppings. She wanted to scream for help, but the dryness in her throat and the scorching desert air rendered her voice almost useless. The sun was merciless, beating down as though it took personal pleasure in her suffering. She tried to lift her legs, to find some foothold against the rocky surface, but it was too steep. The rope was all that kept her from plummeting, yet with each movement she felt it chafe and groan against the stone. It was wearing down, and there was no one around to fix it. Time lost meaning under that glare. She fought to stay conscious, her mind looping through images of the unit she had lost in that final Delta Force mission. Guilt boiled in her chest. How many times had she replayed that scenario? If only she had seen the signs of betrayal earlier, if only she had pulled her team out faster. Now, ironically, she found herself betrayed again, but this time it wasn't halfway across the world. It was right here, in the land she thought she'd help protect. Her arms throbbed from the zip ties, her shoulders ached, and her lips were cracked to the point of bleeding. She attempted to twist around, to maybe wedge her bound wrists against a sharp edge to free them, but each shift only made the rope scrape louder. Every breath was agony. As the minutes bled into an hour, her muscles gave out. She sagged against the rope, letting her head droop forward. The sun felt even more oppressive, draining the last of her strength. She wondered if she would faint and simply never wake up. Perhaps that would be a mercy. Her mind drifted. She saw images of her old teammates, faces from the past that felt both close and distant. She could still smell the gunpowder, hear the frantic radio calls. She relived the final explosion that tore apart their unit's transport, an inferno she had somehow stumbled away from, battered and half-deaf, to discover the rest had perished. Surviving that had been torture enough, living day by day with the weight of all those lost lives on her conscience. Now, as she dangled over oblivion, a bitter thought crept in. I will die alone, unknown and for nothing. The desert sun will bleach her bones, the wind scattering her remains into the cracks of this nameless canyon. No one would write a eulogy for her. No one would find her in time. The pain and exhaustion finally overwhelmed her. Her eyes fluttered shut, darkness creeping in from the edges of her vision. Before she surrendered to it fully, she had one last haunting thought. I left the war behind, but the war never left me. Then the blackness swallowed her, and the world drifted away. The sunlight was unrelenting when Lena Hart began to drift toward consciousness again. Her head throbbed in protest, and each ragged inhale felt like her lungs were being scoured by desert sand. She tried to raise her eyelids, but the brightness forced them shut. For a split second she thought she heard a voice calling her name, soft, almost compassionate, yet the sound vanished into the relentless hum of hot wind scraping over stone. Slowly she realized that no one was really there. The call she heard was nothing more than the wind itself, swirling grains of dust and grit against the barren cliff face. Lena's lips parted in a futile attempt to speak, but her throat was too parched to form any words. She could barely recall how long she had been hanging there. Time had become a distorted concept somewhere between unconsciousness and pain. In the back of her mind she knew she had been left to die, dangling off a towering cliff with a frayed rope, her arms bound behind her back. The dryness in her mouth intensified, and a dull ache spread across her shoulders. With monumental effort she managed to part her eyelids again. This time something registered, a rhythmic, muffled thud echoing through the empty air. It reminded her of distant drum beats, but slightly irregular, each note accompanied by a faint crunch. A lull of wind offered her a clearer moment. She forced herself to focus on that sound. Hoofbeats? The realization surprised her, though she'd been stationed in desert regions long enough to know about wild horses roaming certain parts of Arizona. Still, it seemed impossible that a band of feral Mustangs would appear here, teetering on the edge of nowhere. Yet, as her vision adjusted, she saw silhouettes moving across the shimmering horizon. A wave of dizziness hit her, so she let her head slump again. She thought she might be hallucinating. The heat was punishing, and she felt as though her mind could conjure anything in a desperate attempt to survive. But the sounds persisted. Clip, clop, clip, clop. Each step measured, unhurried, and proud. They grew louder, creeping nearer to the ledge above. At last she forced her eyes open wide enough to glimpse a sight both magnificent and bewildering. Several horses walked in single file, emerging from the glaring sunshine like apparitions. Their coats gleamed with sweat, chestnut, roan, gray. No saddles, no bridles, no people. Just living embodiments of absolute freedom. One of them, a striking black Mustang, broke away from the group. Its mane was thick and somewhat tangled, and as it moved closer, Lena noticed a long scar slashed across its left shoulder, an old wound that had healed into a pale streak against the dark coat. She tried to speak, to call out for help, but her voice was only a breathy rasp. The Mustang jerked its head slightly, ears pricked forward, alert. It inched nearer the rocky outcrop where Lena's rope was anchored. There was a hesitant elegance in the animal's movements. Its nostrils flared, drawing in the sense of sweat, blood, and fear. Lena's entire body trembled, each jolt tugging on the precarious rope. She wanted to scream, anything to get the horse's attention, though it already seemed fixated on the rope. The Mustang snorted, stomping a front hoof with a dull thud on the dusty rock. Lena let out a faint whimper, trying to form the word help, but her cracked lips barely managed a whisper. Yet the horse's ears swiveled. Somehow it had heard that fragile note. As if sensing there was something alive attached to that rope, the black Mustang lowered its head and nudged the braided strand with its muzzle. In that moment, Lena felt a flicker of hope, though she still questioned whether her mind was playing cruel tricks. The black Mustang did not retreat. Despite having every instinct to flee at unfamiliar human scent and movement, it lingered, nosing the tension in the rope. Two other Mustangs soon approached, a deep red mare with a white blaze and a smaller gray with a silvery mane. They formed a cautious semicircle, their bodies alert. None of this was typical animal curiosity. There was a purpose to their positions, as if each took a role in whatever unspoken plan they were about to enact. The black Mustang then clamped its jaws gently around the rope, testing the resistance. It pulled back slightly, muscles rippling along its powerful neck. A few grains of sand sprinkled off the ledge, and Lena's heart pounded faster. She felt a sudden upward jerk, no more than an inch or two, but enough to jar her from the brink of unconsciousness. A wave of dizziness washed over her. "They're trying to lift me?" Her rational mind screamed that this was impossible. Wild horses didn't just rescue humans. But something about these creatures broke all expectations. The black Mustang seemed to understand the fragile line between life and death. It stepped backward in measured increments, keeping the rope taut. The other two Mustangs closed in on either side, their bodies acting as living barriers so the rope wouldn't slide off the rock's edge. Lena felt her body shift upward slightly. She attempted to still herself, but every jostle made the rope groan in protest. She imagined it snapping in two. Yet the Mustangs kept pulling, an odd sense of coordination guiding them. A swirl of desert wind kicked up more sand, stinging Lena's eyes, but she refused to close them now. She had to see whether this rescue was real or yet another cruel mirage. The black Mustang bunched its hindquarters, straining with the effort. Veins stood out along its neck and shoulders, the scar across its shoulder pulling taut. One misstep could mean the rope sliding or Lena losing what little support she had. The red mare angled herself in a crouch, hooves braced against loose gravel, while the gray gently nudged the rope near the anchor point. It was as if they were working in concert, each playing a role in stabilizing the line. With each tug, Lena ascended another painful inch. Her wrists, still bound behind her back, felt numb, and her shoulders screamed in protest. She was entirely at the mercy of these animals, beings she had never met, who had no reason or obligation to save her life. She tried to speak again, but her throat was too dry to manage anything beyond a rasp of air. Time slowed to a series of heartbeats. Lena's boot grazed the cliff, sending pebbles tumbling into the void. She bit her lip to stifle a cry. The black Mustang, however, jerked its head once more, putting fresh muscle into the pull. She rose another few inches. Her hip bumped a rock ledge, scraping raw skin. If not for the adrenaline spiking through her veins, she might have passed out from the pain. The entire process felt endless. Each second was an exercise in delicate tension. Any abrupt movement, any miscalculation by the Mustangs could have spelled disaster. Lena's mind churned with disbelief. Animals were not supposed to do this. Even well-trained horses might hesitate to engage with something so precarious. Yet these were wild Mustangs, known for their independence and wariness of humans. If anyone had told her such a thing would happen, she would have deemed it an exaggerated legend. The black Mustang lowered its head again, pulling with a concentrated effort that made its sinewy muscles ripple beneath the coat. A final surge of strain, and Lena felt her feet scrape over a ledge. She let out a trembling exhale, noticing for the first time how close she was to the top. She kicked feebly, searching for stable ground. Inch by inch, she felt her body clearing the cliff's edge. Suddenly, her torso was over the lip of the rock. She was no longer dangling in midair. A moment later, she collapsed onto the ledge with a gasp, face pressed against rough stone. Her entire frame shook uncontrollably, from exhaustion, from fear, from unspoken gratitude. The rope was still tight around her waist, but now it lay slack. She was, at last, on relatively solid ground. She closed her eyes, letting out a raw sob of relief. She wanted to breathe, but it came in ragged spurts, each breath a struggle. The Mustangs shuffled away a few steps, as if granting her space. When Lena forced her eyes open again, she saw them standing a short distance off, heads high, tails flicking at the dust. For several moments all Lena could do was lie there on the rock, body quivering, the stench of blood and sweat clinging to her clothes. Her wrists were still zipped together behind her back. She needed to free them. But first she needed the strength to sit up. Her lungs burned, her limbs felt like they didn't belong to her, yet the knowledge that she was alive propelled her. 1 inch at a time she dragged herself until she was sitting, shoulders screaming in pain. The black Mustang, the one that had pulled the rope, stepped forward. Against the harsh glare of midday sun it seemed almost carved out of obsidian. The old scar across its shoulder was a stark reminder that it too had survived something once. Lena felt a surge of empathy she never imagined she could feel for a creature she'd known less than an hour. It halted a few feet away, regarding her with large, unblinking eyes. There was no aggression in its stance, just a silent depth, as though it were assessing the battered human in front of it. Lena swallowed, tasting the dryness in her mouth. She thought back to her days in Delta Force, how rarely she saw pure altruism in a war zone, and here was this Mustang, a wild horse that owed her nothing, yet had just saved her life. Her voice crackled, the dryness making each word a labor, but she forced them out. You saved me, you didn't have to. Her mind fumbled for a name, something that might capture this creature's essence. Her gaze lingered on the dark sheen of its coat, so black that it appeared to absorb the desert light. There was a depth, a quiet power in that color. She swallowed again, wincing as her throat protested. Sable, she whispered. That's your name now, Sable. The word rolled off her tongue in a scratchy whisper. She wasn't even sure the horse heard it, let alone cared, but somehow it felt right. Sable, she repeated, this time a fraction louder. The Mustang cocked its head slightly, ears twitching. Lena swore it understood. With a trembling hand she reached forward, ignoring the scream in her wrists. The horse bent its neck, bridging the gap, and allowed her fingertips to brush its warm muzzle. Its breath came out in a short, steamy puff against her skin, startling her with its warmth. Lena sucked in a ragged breath, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She couldn't remember the last time she'd shed a tear, even after losing her Delta teammates. She had buried that grief so deep, it had taken a near-death experience and the mercy of a wild Mustang to bring it bubbling back. Sable, she said again, voice steadier now, I owe you everything. A soft snort escaped the horse, as though acknowledging her presence without fear. 2 other Mustangs hovered nearby, the red mare and the gray, watching with a caution that still carried a hint of curiosity. None of them bolted. None turned away. This moment felt sacred, suspended in time between the savage heat of the desert and the intangible bond now forming between woman and horse. Lena let her hand linger against Sable's coat. The horse's flanks rose and fell in a calm rhythm. She thought about how, in a single moment of synergy, these creatures had displayed a level of coordination and empathy that defied logic. She felt no illusions about controlling or taming them. It was more akin to an unspoken partnership, born out of necessity and trust. After a few heartbeats, Sable stepped back, allowing the distance to grow once again. Lena took a deep breath, steeling herself. She needed to cut the zip ties around her wrists, find water, and figure out how to get out of this desolate canyon. But the rawness in her chest told her something profound had changed. She wasn't alone anymore. Not entirely. A piece of the wild had claimed her, just as she had given the Mustang a name. As she looked around, the desert stretched on, indifferent and stark. The sun wasn't done scorching the land, and predators still lurked in its shadows, both animal and human. She was wounded, dehydrated, and had no immediate means of defense. Yet, impossibly, she had been granted a second chance at life by creatures that owed her nothing. She mustered a shaky smile. Sometimes rescue comes from the last place anyone expects, she thought. And perhaps that was the lesson she needed after all those years of warfare and betrayal, that help could arrive in a form she'd never even imagined. Lena lay still on the rocky plateau, her pulse throbbing in her ears. Dried blood stuck to her forearm where a shallow cut refused to clot properly in the relentless desert heat. Her lips were chapped and brittle, and each breath she took felt like a struggle against invisible barbed wire tightening around her lungs. The day's survival had come at a cost, and her body was rapidly succumbing to the exhaustion and pain she'd been holding at bay. Sable, the black Mustang with the pale scar on its shoulder, stood just a few feet away. Its dark coat shimmered in the sun, every muscle defined as it shifted weight from one hoof to the other. The horse pawed lightly at the ground with its front hoof, as though impatient or concerned. When Lena turned her head to look at it, she noticed how Sable's ears twitched toward the north, the direction of the nearest Border Patrol outpost. It was as if the Mustang sensed that somewhere across the dunes lay what Lena needed: human help, water, medical supplies, and safety. Summoning every scrap of willpower, Lena attempted to push herself up onto an elbow. Her limbs protested, shaking violently. She could still feel the zip ties digging into her wrists. At least her captors had dropped her gear and cut the old bindings at some point, maybe to tie her differently. But she remained largely defenseless. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She pressed her free hand against the hot stone beneath her, desperate to stay conscious. Sable watched quietly, then took a step forward. To Lena's astonishment, the Mustang climbed onto a small rise of sandstone. With a measured movement, it bent its knees, lowering one foreleg, almost like a horse trained to kneel on command. But Sable was no ordinary steed accustomed to the reins of a rider. It was a wild creature born in open skies and desert storms. The very sight of it adopting such a posture defied logic. "That's not possible," Lena whispered under her breath, the dryness of her throat turning the words raspy. She blinked several times, fighting against the haze that threatened to close in around her vision. The horse was inviting her to climb onto its back. No yoke, no saddle, no bridle. Just raw trust. For a moment she doubted her own senses, but the Mustang remained in that lowered stance, occasionally flicking its tail at desert flies. Lena had neither strength nor time to question it further. If she wanted to survive, she needed to move. Her body demanded water, shade, and proper medical attention. Gritting her teeth, she crawled closer to the horse. The act alone felt like crossing miles, every inch gained through overwhelming pain. When she reached Sable's flank, she slid one trembling hand into the horse's coarse mane. The contact sent a jolt of warmth through her, far gentler than she expected. Sable didn't flinch. Instead, the Mustang seemed to brace itself, as if patiently waiting for her to climb aboard. Lena exhaled a shaky breath. Without a stirrup or any stable foothold, she had to hoist herself up purely by upper body strength and what little remained in her battered legs. She clutched the horse's mane, pulling with arms that felt like they were on fire. Her leg draped awkwardly over Sable's back, sending a sharp sting through the bruises and scrapes that adorned her thighs. A low groan escaped her as she settled, exhausted, astride the Mustang's broad spine. She had no reins to steer, no way to command direction. Yet a sense of trust, unfathomable and immediate, blossomed in her chest. She pressed her torso against Sable's muscular neck, struggling to remain upright. "Okay," she breathed. "We do this your way." Sable rose slowly to its full height, careful not to jostle its precarious passenger. Lena clung tighter, praying silently that her meager grip wouldn't fail her. Every motion sent jolts of pain through her spine and arms, but she refused to relent. Survival often demanded feats no training could prepare you for. With the faintest shift of weight, Sable started forward. At first its pace was cautious, a gentle walk that allowed Lena to keep her seat. The midday sun beat down mercilessly, but at least she was no longer lying on the rocks. Over time, the horse settled into a steady rhythm, crossing dunes of golden sand that glinted like shards of glass. Occasionally, the Mustang paused, sniffing at the air or adjusting its path around outcrops of jagged stone. Lena drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind battered by the heat and dehydration. Each time she opened her eyes, she saw Sable's dark mane swaying in front of her, a hypnotic wave that soothed her frayed nerves. The desert blurred into a tapestry of shifting shades, browns, ochres, and yellows. Hours passed this way, the Mustang pressing onward as though guided by an internal compass. Eventually, Lena managed to whisper, "Where are we going?" The question was half to herself, half to the animal. Sable offered no vocal reply, but the horse's confident stride suggested a purpose. Lena felt a quiet awe building within her. She had never believed in miraculous interventions, especially not from wildlife. Yet here she was, on the back of a creature that seemed to act with a sense of direction no map could provide. By the time dusk approached, the wind carried a cooler undertone, and Lena's eyes opened to see a labyrinth of canyons behind them. Sable had veered north-northwest away from the region where Lena had first been ambushed. Her mind churned with questions. Does it somehow know where the station is? Has it smelled water? Or is this just random wandering? But in her weakened state she chose not to doubt. Trust was all she had left. She dozed off again, lulled by the Mustang's heartbeat that she could almost sense through the gentle rocking of its gait. Darkness crept over the land, and the last image she held was the silhouette of Sable against the crimson sky. The night's chill revived her somewhat. When Lena next opened her eyes, it was to find herself still perched on Sable's back. Stars blazed overhead in a velvety sky. A faint orange glow flickered in the distance. Lights from the Border Patrol's forward operating base, or so she guessed. Her chest tightened in relief. If that was truly the outpost, she might actually survive this ordeal. Unbeknownst to Lena, the nearest station, referred to as BTU Sector Outpost 3, had been on high alert. A cluster of intermittent signals had flagged an anomaly in the desert. Thermal imaging from a tower indicated a single human heat signature moving across the sands, but the shape of the reading was off. It wasn't a person walking. The thermal silhouette appeared to be a person elevated, as if riding an animal. The incongruity prompted the night watch to call it in. "Maria Torres, we have an unusual contact," one of the techs reported. "Might be a smuggler, or maybe an injured hiker on a stray horse, hard to say." Maria Torres, a compact woman in her early 30s with sharp eyes and a manner that brooked no nonsense, was currently conducting a field audit at the outpost. She'd arrived a week prior to investigate rumors of falsified paperwork. Now she found herself roped into a potential rescue operation. Intrigued, she ordered a quick response team to gear up, with an ATV, medical supplies, and searchlights. The ragtag convoy set off from the gates. A whirring drone overhead provided updated thermal data guiding them across the dunes. Maria herself drove the lead ATV, her breath quickening in anticipation. She had heard stories from local ranchers about wild Mustangs occasionally interacting with humans, but never anything quite like this. The night was eerily silent except for the rumble of engines and the hiss of windblown sand. Finally, the headlights illuminated a scene none of them expected: a solitary black horse, standing stock still, a limp figure slumped over its back. The horse did not spook at the sudden intrusion of vehicles or bright lights. Instead, it merely lifted its head, ears turning toward them with mild caution. "Contact at 2 o'clock, one of the agents in the rear seat called out. Maria cut the engine and hopped off, motioning the others to do the same. The last thing she wanted was to scare the animal. She raised her hands slowly, approaching with deliberate calm. The horse tensed but did not bolt. Maria's flashlight revealed the battered form of a woman in a torn uniform. Recognizing Lena's face from station files, Maria's heart lurched. "My God," she whispered, "it's Agent Hart. She's alive?" One of the medics quickly moved forward with a stretcher. The Mustang remained eerily cooperative, shifting only a few steps to let them ease Lena down. Maria pressed a hand gently against Lena's cheek, feeling the scorching heat of fever. Dehydration likely, cuts, bruises, but unbelievably her heart was still beating. As they lifted Lena onto the stretcher, the black horse circled them once, hooves muffled by sand. Maria could feel an intensity in the animal's gaze, protective but uncertain. It stomped once, a short snort escaping its nostrils, as if to say it was not entirely sure about these new humans. Yet it did not run. "Let's load her up," Maria ordered. "We need to get her back for treatment immediately. Carter, Wilson, run the IV in the truck." They strapped Lena securely, hooking up an IV bag as they settled her onto one of the ATVs. Maria took one last look at the horse, which had stepped back a few yards. Headlights played across the creature's sleek flanks. Maria's mind reeled at the idea that a wild Mustang might have carried Lena all this way. Before they departed, the horse lifted its muzzle, letting out a short, sharp neigh. The sound echoed in the darkness, almost like a challenge, and then ended abruptly, as if it was satisfied that Lena was safe. Back at the outpost, Lena was rushed into the on-site medical bay. Doctors confirmed severe dehydration, heat stroke, and various abrasions, but against all odds, no life-threatening injuries. She would need rest, fluids, and time to heal. After hooking her up to an IV drip and stabilizing her vital signs, the medical staff let her drift into an exhausted sleep. Maria Torres stood outside the infirmary, peering through the window. She was exhausted herself, but compelled to stay. Something at the edge of her vision made her turn. There, by the chain-link fence near the parking area, stood the same black Mustang. Its eyes caught the harsh floodlights of the outpost, yet it neither flinched nor turned away. It had followed them. 1 hour passed, then 2. Midnight rolled into a quiet hush. Agents on break strolled outside to investigate the unusual visitor. Some tried to approach with handfuls of hay or canteens of water. The horse retreated a few paces each time, but never fled the grounds entirely. It simply kept its gaze locked on the infirmary doors, as though waiting for a sign or a person. Maria eventually approached, cautious but curious, keeping her posture non-threatening. "Where did you come from?" she murmured. The horse pawed at the gravel, then stilled. Its body language suggested no immediate aggression, but also no acceptance of anyone except the woman it had carried here. By dawn it had neither eaten nor wandered off. The rumor spread through the outpost that a ghost horse was standing vigil for Agent Hart. Some laughed it off as a tall tale, others ventured outside to see it with their own eyes. Every single one came away astonished. Maria, who had spent years training canine units, recognized a bond that defied standard explanation. "I've worked with plenty of dogs who obey no one except their handler," she explained to the outpost chief. "But this is different. This Mustang isn't here because it's domesticated or was raised by humans. It chose to be here for her." At noon, Lena finally regained consciousness enough to speak. A nurse hovered, asking if there was anyone they should contact. Next of kin, a friend, a superior officer, but Lena's voice was almost inaudible, her lips still cracked. When the nurse leaned in, she heard one word: "Sable." At that same moment, the black Mustang, still lingering beyond the window, gave a soft neigh, a strange affirmation, as though it sensed that the person it had saved was calling its name. The outpost staff exchanged glances of disbelief. This was no ordinary rescue story. Something extraordinary bound the fates of that battered border agent and the wild horse who waited, unwavering beneath the Arizona sun. Lena Hart slipped in and out of consciousness for nearly 2 full days after she collapsed upon returning to the outpost. The medical team at BTU Sector Outpost 3 worked tirelessly to stabilize her, providing intravenous fluids, oxygen, and antibiotics to combat the onset of infection from her desert wounds. One nurse later confided to Agent Maria Torres that, at several points, Lena's condition had balanced on a razor's edge. While Lena fought for her life, the black Mustang Sable had stood vigil just outside the chain-link fence, refusing to leave. When Lena finally awoke, she found herself lying on a cot within a small but adequately furnished infirmary. White overhead lights hummed softly, and an IV line snaked down from a saline bag into her arm. Her entire body ached, a reminder of the savage beating the desert had given her. Blinking to clear the haze, she was greeted by the concerned gaze of Maria Torres, who sat in a metal folding chair pulled close to Lena's bedside. "Sergeant Hart," Maria said gently. "Can you hear me?" Lena swallowed. Her mouth still felt parched, but at least it wasn't the scorching desert dryness that once threatened to choke the life out of her. She nodded slowly, careful not to jostle her throbbing head. "Water," Lena croaked. Maria produced a plastic cup with a straw, helping Lena take small, careful sips. The first taste of cool water was nothing short of a miracle. Each swallow burned down her throat, yet it was a pain tinged with relief. She closed her eyes, grateful to be alive. After a minute she breathed out, her voice still raspy. "I... Sable." A brief flicker of amusement touched Maria's face. She nodded toward the window. "He's still here," she said quietly. "Hasn't left since we brought you in." Lena let out a shaky exhale, only half believing that the Mustang had stayed. In truth, she wasn't entirely sure if the memory of riding Sable across the dunes had been real or some feverish hallucination. But the gentleness in Maria's eyes suggested it was all true. She tried to raise herself on one elbow, but Maria placed a hand on her shoulder. "Take it easy," the agent advised. "Your body's been through hell. You nearly died out there." "Feels like it," Lena murmured. Despite her exhaustion, a single burning question rose to the front of her mind. Who authorized that patrol route?" she asked, her expression tightening. "El Silencio. Why was I sent out alone?" Maria leaned back in the chair, crossing her arms. "We were hoping you could tell us," she replied carefully. "You were assigned the route by Supervisor Carver's office, as far as we can see?" "Carver," Lena repeated, her tone turning grim. "He handed me the updated map personally, but—" She pressed her lips together, remembering how the map had diverged from her usual references. At the time, she'd simply assumed it was a standard revision. "I need to see the official logs," she insisted. "All the duty rosters, the signatures, everything." Maria studied Lena's face, saw the urgency burning behind her eyes, and gave a slow nod. "I'll get them," she said. "But you should really rest, at least for a few hours." Lena ignored the suggestion. Rest was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when she suspected she'd been set up. For years she had battled nightmares of betrayal from her Delta Force days. Now it seemed betrayal had found her yet again, this time within the dusty corridors of the Border Patrol. Despite her weakened condition, Lena soon found herself propped up by pillows, scanning a series of printed files spread across her lap. With each page, her frown deepened. The official mission logs showed her name, her supposed signature, and a timestamp that placed her briefing on the previous Tuesday morning. Yet the scrawl at the bottom wasn't her handwriting. It looked eerily close, perhaps to a passing glance, but Lena recognized her own loops and angles, and these were off. The forger had tried to replicate her style, but it was not quite perfect. Maria stood beside the cot, arms folded. She occasionally glanced over Lena's shoulder as Lena flipped through the documents. The hum of the overhead fluorescent lights and the distant chatter of medical staff provided a subdued backdrop. "This form claims I authorized the route myself," Lena muttered, tapping a finger on the bold black lines of text. "The signature is a digital overlay. Someone took a sample of my handwriting from an old file. And this so-called updated map is different from the one I used to navigate. See these notations? They direct me straight to a dead zone." She pointed to a sector marked with a small red X on the topographical chart. Maria nodded grimly. "We cross-referenced the access logs. The digital file for the map was edited from an internal terminal using a sub-account assigned to Carver's office. We have partial data that suggests a second user, but the trail is murky, possibly a clerk or an accomplice. Hard to say yet." Lena's eyes burned with anger. "This means he intentionally manipulated my route," she said through clenched teeth. "That sector is completely outside normal comm range. It's the perfect place to vanish." "Or to be vanished," Maria said quietly. Lena's breathing grew uneven as she forced herself to remain calm. The memory of waking up bound and suspended over a cliff flared in her mind. "He never expected me to come back alive," she whispered. Then, more forcefully, "He'll regret not finishing the job himself." Maria reached out, lightly touching Lena's arm. "We still don't know the entire story," she warned, "but it's clear someone set you up. There are rumors Carver has been in contact with certain local groups. Cartel, smugglers, we're not sure. If that's true, he might have orchestrated the entire mission, expecting you wouldn't return to talk about it." Lena closed her eyes for a moment, wrestling with a surge of fury. All those nights replaying the memory of her Delta Force betrayal, only to face a different brand of treachery here on U.S. soil. She inhaled, then forced her voice to steady. "We have to expose him," she said. "He'll either try to run or try to bury this even deeper." Maria gave a resolute nod. "I'm with you, but we have to be careful. Carver is a supervisor. He has access to systems, personnel, and maybe enough allies to cover his tracks. If we confront him head-on without evidence, it could backfire." "We have evidence," Lena growled, gesturing to the forged signature. "I want him pinned." "Then we need to act fast," Maria agreed. "I'll keep these docs secure. Once we isolate the station's main server and confirm the fraudulent login, we'll have enough to call in the Department of Homeland Security's internal affairs. But we might not have that window of time." Lena set the papers aside, flexing her stiff joints as she attempted to sit upright. Though every muscle protested, her adrenaline overshadowed the pain. "If he suspects I'm awake and asking questions," she said, "he might strike first." Maria's expression hardened. "We'll be ready." Night settled over the outpost like an uneasy blanket. Clouds drifted across the sky, dimming the stars and robbing the moonlight. A hush fell across the compound as the day shift handed duties off to the skeleton crew of night personnel. Dim security lamps glowed along the fencing, but the brightness hardly compared to the scorching midday sun. Inside the main building, corridor lights flickered sporadically, a quirk in the aging wiring that gave the place a faintly haunted feel. Sable remained close, near an open corridor that faced the southern approach. Occasionally an agent would pass by, casting a curious glance at the Mustang. Although the horse had gained a minor celebrity status among the station personnel, no one dared approach too closely. Sable tolerated a small distance but pinned its ears if anyone tried to come within arm's reach. Unless that someone was Lena or, to a lesser extent, Maria. Around midnight, Lena dozed restlessly in her infirmary cot. Her side still throbbed, and the variety of bruises along her ribs made breathing shallow and painful. She was supposed to be sleeping, but every time her eyes closed, the memory of dangling from that cliff returned in sharp flashes. The sense of betrayal, the stench of raw fear, the scorching sun on her face, they converged in a half-waking dream that forced her awake again and again. She propped herself up on one elbow, scanning the room. A single nurse remained at the desk outside. Through the window she spotted Sable's silhouette, motionless as a statue. Something about the horse's stance worried her, ears forward, muscles tensed. The Mustang stared into the darkness beyond the reach of the outpost floodlights. "Is Sable sensing something I can't?" Lena wondered. She rubbed her temples, wishing the ache would stop. Maybe she was projecting her anxieties onto the horse. Yet the tension in the air felt real, as though the desert itself held its breath. At 1:32 a.m., the entire outpost plunged into blackness. Every light blinked out in unison, leaving only the faint glow of emergency exit signs. A few startled shouts echoed down the corridors. The backup generators, which should have kicked on within seconds, remained silent. Lena's eyes shot wide as she realized the station was now blind. No cameras, no external comms, no standard defenses. From somewhere deeper in the building came a crash. Then static hissed on a radio, cutting off abruptly. The nurse outside Lena's door sprang to her feet, confusion etched on her face. Before either of them could speak, they heard a throaty neigh reverberate from the hallway that led outside. "Sable," Lena breathed. She tried to stand, ignoring the wave of dizziness. The nurse touched Lena's shoulder. "You should stay put," she said, half panicked. "We'll figure out." Her words died away as a second crash resonated, this time from near the technical storage room. The sound of glass shattering came next. Lena's survival instincts roared to life. Despite her injuries, she yanked the IV line from her arm and grabbed her ballistic vest, which hung from a nearby chair. She had asked for it earlier as a precaution, half expecting something like this. Her side flared in pain, but her mind was already in crisis mode. "Find a safe place to hide," Lena urged the nurse. "Lock the door behind you." Still dizzy, she eased her vest on and tightened the straps. Next, she reached for the improvised weapon stash that Maria had arranged, a locked cabinet containing a sidearm and an extra magazine. She keyed in the code and retrieved a Glock 19, checking the chamber with a practiced flick of her wrist. Outside the infirmary's small window, Sable's neigh rose again, a sharper, more urgent cry followed by the sound of pounding hooves on concrete. Heart hammering, Lena slipped into the corridor, scanning the gloom for movement. Emergency lights cast flickering shadows, painting the walls in shifting reds and yellows. Halfway down the hallway, she found Maria crouched behind a vending machine, her own sidearm drawn. The agent gestured for Lena to approach slowly. "They cut the power from the main hub," Maria whispered, her breath ragged. "Generators are offline. I heard gunfire near the security desk." "Any idea how many?" Lena asked, pressing her back against the wall. Maria shook her head. "At least 4, possibly more. They got in through the southern gate. Someone took out the guard there." Lena clenched her jaw. "They're here for me, or maybe for the evidence we collected." "Or both," Maria whispered. She led Lena to a junction where the hallway split into 2 directions. One led to the infirmary storeroom and the small computer closet, the other to the main lobby. From around the corner they caught a glimpse of a muzzle flash. A bullet ricocheted off the tile, sending shards of floor flying. Maria returned fire in a short burst, forcing the intruders to retreat. She and Lena ducked back behind the corner. "We can't let them get to the main servers," Maria hissed. "That's where the evidence is saved." Lena's mind churned. The attackers likely wanted to destroy any digital trace that could implicate Carver or their entire operation. "I'll head for the server," she said, swallowing against the dryness in her throat. "You try to secure the front entrance. If they corner us, we're done." Maria nodded, tossing Lena a small flashlight. "Be careful," she whispered. "They're armed to the teeth." As Lena limped toward the server room, she heard a thunderous commotion outside. Rounding a corner, she saw a side exit that led to the compound courtyard. Through the glass of the door, she spotted a man with an AK-47 creeping along the perimeter, searching for a vantage point. Before Lena could act, a shadow hurtled from the darkness, Sable, charging at full speed. The Mustang reared back, then slammed both front hooves into the gunman's chest. The impact flung him against the outer wall with a sickening crunch. He slumped to the ground, unmoving. Lena watched in stunned disbelief. A second figure emerged, brandishing a taser or electric baton, but upon seeing Sable's wild eyes and flaring nostrils, he froze. The horse snorted, spun around, and delivered a powerful kick with its hind legs. The figure dropped instantly. Even from inside, Lena could sense the raw force behind those strikes. She nearly called out, but Sable was already disappearing into the gloom, presumably to keep another vantage point under watch. "That horse!" Lena whispered to herself, half in awe. Then, remembering her mission, she forced her attention back to the corridor. Focus. The server room. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, momentarily dulling the throbbing in her ribs. Turning another corner, she nearly collided with a third attacker, a lean man wearing a ski mask, gripping a pistol. He fired a shot that whizzed past her ear, the muzzle flash illuminating the corridor in a burst of white. Lena dropped to a knee, returning fire. Her second bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. With a strained groan, he crumpled behind a row of lockers, pistol clattering across the floor. Gasping, Lena rushed forward, kicking the discarded pistol out of reach. She glanced around, scanning for more threats, but the hallway was still. The only sounds were the stutter of distant gunfire, the hiss of radio static, and the pounding of her own heartbeat. A series of quick shots echoed from the far side of the compound near the main lobby. Lena gripped her Glock and hurried in that direction, ignoring the protests of her battered muscles. She rounded the final corner to see Maria pinned behind an overturned metal desk. Sparks danced across the floor, and the overhead lights flickered anew, suggesting someone had partially restored a fraction of power or lighting. Hidden behind a large potted cactus, a figure in the corridor fired relentlessly at Maria's cover. Lena squinted, trying to make out who the shooter was. Then he leaned out a fraction more, and the overhead light revealed Supervisor Neil Carver's face. His usual crisp uniform was nowhere to be seen. Instead, he wore dark cargo pants and a plain black shirt, a sidearm in his hand. He barked orders in Spanish to an unseen accomplice at the corridor's far end, telling them to burn the server if they found it. Maria attempted a suppressive shot, but Carver ducked behind a pillar, sneering. "Maria Torres," he called, voice laced with contempt. "Lena Hart, are you both still alive? I'll have to remedy that." Lena felt her pulse spike, fury overshadowing caution. She crept along the wall's edge, trying to flank him. In the flickering light, she could see Carver's face twisted with frustration and a hint of panic. He had not expected such fierce resistance. He likely anticipated an easy infiltration, sabotage of the station's records, and elimination of Lena. By the time any reinforcements arrived, it would have been too late. Maria glanced over her shoulder, saw Lena approaching. She gave a slight nod, a silent signal that they needed to coordinate. Lena inched closer, sliding behind a column across from Carver's position. She steadied her breathing. A cold rage settled in her heart, the same focus she had once used in Delta Force operations when cornered by enemy ambush. Carver yelled, "You should have died out there, Hart." His tone carried a vindictive heat. "It would have saved me the trouble, but you had to come crawling back with your damned horse and your bleeding heart." Lena swallowed a knife blade of hatred. He orchestrated everything, she thought. He set me up for death. She checked her magazine, found 4 rounds left, more than enough to end this if she landed a direct shot. As if sensing her presence, Carver abruptly swung his arm out from behind the pillar. The muzzle of his gun sparked. A bullet whined past Lena, hitting the wall behind her. She ducked and returned fire, but Carver darted out of view. Maria seized the moment to pop out from behind the desk, firing a shot that grazed Carver's sleeve. He cursed, stumbling. Then, with a vicious determination, he whirled around, gun aimed squarely at Maria's chest. Lena's stomach lurched. From her angle she couldn't line up a clear shot in time. Just as Carver squeezed the trigger, a dark shape burst in from the side corridor. Sable thundered into view, hooves clattering on the tile. The Mustang lowered its head, crashing full force into Carver's shoulder. The shot went wide, a deafening crack that sent plaster dust raining from the ceiling. Carver spun off balance, nearly dropping his weapon. A feral snarl twisted his face as he recognized the same horse rumored to have saved Lena's life. "Damn animal," he shouted, raising his gun again. Lena lurched forward, intending to put herself between Carver and Sable, but her injured leg slowed her. Carver pulled the trigger. The muzzle flash lit the corridor for a fraction of a second. Sable reared back with a tortured whinny. Lena watched, horror-struck, as the Mustang shuddered, then staggered sideways. Blood quickly darkened the glossy black coat near its left flank. "No." Lena's voice tore from her throat. She fired twice, forcing Carver to dive for cover behind a reception counter. Sable stumbled, knees buckling. The horse collapsed onto its side, a ragged exhale escaping its muzzle. Scarlet stained the tiles beneath it, pooling outward. Lena's vision swam with rage, heartbreak twisting inside her chest. In that split second, all she remembered was the infinite times Sable had saved her, pulling her up the cliff, guiding her across the desert, defending this station from intruders. Without thinking, she broke cover and sprinted across the open corridor to Carver's position. Carver aimed again, but Lena was already upon him. She slammed her Glock into his wrist, knocking the gun from his grip. With her free hand, she seized his collar and drove him backward, leveraging every ounce of her training. Pain flared in her side, but adrenaline blotted it out. Carver tried to punch her, but she twisted, hooking his arm and slamming him face first into the floor. He struggled, spewing curses, but Lena pinned him with her knee. She wrenched his arm behind his back so forcefully he let out a guttural yelp. "You orchestrated this," she seethed. "You used me, you sold out this outpost, and you tried to kill me just to hide your crimes." Carver spat blood from a split lip, eyes wide with venom. "You're just an expendable soldier. You shouldn't have come back. If that horse—" His words ended in a hiss of pain as Lena twisted his arm further. The corridor lights flickered again, illuminating Maria's approach from behind the overturned desk. Her eyes flicked from the wounded Mustang to Carver pinned under Lena's knee. Breathing hard, Maria snapped handcuffs onto Carver's wrists. "Neil Carver, as acting agent of internal affairs, I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy, forgery of federal documents, attempted murder of a Border Patrol agent, and collusion with cross-border criminal enterprises. I suggest you shut up before you add resisting arrest to the list." Carver glared but said nothing. Maria quickly patted him down, retrieving a set of keys and a small thumb drive from his pocket. "I think we'll find everything we need here," she said grimly. Only then did Lena release Carver, rolling off him to stagger toward Sable. The Mustang lay sprawled on its side, eyes half-lidded. A bullet hole marred its left flank, oozing blood that formed a sticky puddle around its midsection. Lena's heart clenched at the sight. She dropped to her knees, ignoring the tile digging into her own bruised legs. With trembling hands, she touched Sable's flank just above the wound. The horse let out a raspy breath, nostrils flaring weakly. Its gaze flicked to Lena, a flicker of recognition mingled with pain. She could almost feel its life ebbing. The horse had fought so fiercely for her, suffering a wound that might prove fatal. "Stay with me," she whispered, stroking the damp fur near Sable's shoulder. Tears blurred her vision. "You didn't have to do this. No one forced you, but you did it anyway." Footsteps approached. Maria knelt beside Lena, eyes full of sympathy. She placed a hand on Lena's shoulder. "We have a veterinary team on call. We'll do what we can," she said softly. Around them, a handful of loyal BTU agents, those who had remained neutral or simply hadn't known Carver's true nature, gathered in subdued shock. The muzzle flashes had died down, indicating the rest of the cartel men were either subdued or in retreat. "Initiate a field triage for the horse," ordered one of the older sergeants, stepping forward. "Someone get the generator back online. We need lights. We need to contact the vet clinic." Lena gently cradled Sable's head, letting the horse's warm breath wash over her wrist. She recalled how they had first met, how that unstoppable will had pulled her back from the brink of death. Now it was Sable who lay at the threshold of darkness. "You saved me," she whispered again, voice trembling. "I owe you my life 1,000 times over." Sable's eyes fluttered, seeming to track the movement of Lena's hand. The horse exhaled, an almost resigned sound. Then the eyes drifted shut, leaving Lena's heart suspended in dread. She pressed her forehead to the Mustang's damp neck, ignoring the blood soaking her sleeve. Meanwhile, Maria directed the newly arrived backup to secure Carver. 2 agents hoisted him up, ignoring his bitter cursing, and led him away to a makeshift holding cell. Another group of agents rummaged through the bullet-ridden server room, retrieving data backups and verifying that the essential evidence of Carver's betrayal remained intact. Over the next few minutes, power was partially restored. Fluorescent lights hummed to life, revealing a station marred by bullet holes, broken glass, and scattered debris. A battered calm settled over the corridor where Lena knelt by Sable's side. A hush fell among those present, as though collectively holding their breath for the horse that had fought more valiantly than any trained canine they'd ever seen. At last the vet squad arrived, armed with sedatives, clamps, and surgical packs. They carefully examined Sable, confirming that the bullet had penetrated near the left flank. With the horse's large muscle mass, there was a chance to stop the bleeding and suture the wound if no vital organs were hit. The vet injected a mild anesthetic, hoping to stabilize the Mustang enough for transport to a specialized facility. Lena remained on her knees, refusing to leave Sable's side. She clenched her jaw, tears still on the brink of spilling. The memory of Carver's mocking expression flared anew. He had orchestrated everything from the shadows. She recalled how he'd offered to take a desk job, how he'd seemed oddly reluctant to talk about the details of her mission to El Silencio. Every piece now fell into place. But the moment for vengeance had passed. The only thing that mattered was Sable's survival. As the medics lifted Sable onto an improvised stretcher, the Mustang stirred, letting out a feeble snort. Its eyes reopened briefly, scanning the scene with dull awareness. Lena took the horse's muzzle in her hands, ignoring the blood that stained her arms. She whispered softly, "You hold on, Sable, you hear me? You're not done yet." In response, the Mustang offered a weak flick of its ear. The entire corridor seemed to exhale as the vet team carried Sable away, heading for a truck that would transport the horse to the nearest equine trauma center. Lena followed them as far as the door, where she finally collapsed against the wall, her injuries catching up to her. Agents rushed forward to support her, one offering a shoulder to lean on. She refused to be taken to the infirmary yet, not until she saw Sable safely loaded up. Eventually, the engine of the transport roared to life, pulling out of the compound with sirens flashing. Lena stayed in the dusty yard, sweat and tears mingling on her face. Overhead, the clouds had begun to break, allowing moonlight to spill across the battered outpost. She closed her eyes, breathing the crisp desert night air, her heart raw with a mix of rage and gratitude. Behind her, Maria approached quietly, placing a gentle hand on Lena's back. "He's in custody," she said, referring to Carver. "We've got him in irons. The feds will want to question him soon." Lena nodded stiffly, still gazing down the road where the horse trailer had disappeared. "He tried to bury the truth," she said, voice hoarse. "He nearly got me killed, sold out the station to cartels, but the real tragedy is that Sable had to take a bullet for me." Maria's expression hardened, but she offered a respectful nod. "We'll do everything we can to see justice done," she promised. Then, after a brief pause, she added, "You should rest too, Lena. Let the doctors check you over." Exhaustion crashed in like a rogue wave. She gave Maria a weak smile. "In a minute," Lena whispered. "Just let me stand here, breathing a bit longer." Time would reveal the aftermath of Neil Carver's betrayal, the depths of his involvement with the cartel, and the heroic measures Sable took in defending a woman the Mustang owed nothing to. But for this night at least, the outpost was secure. Carver was in cuffs, his conspirators either captured or fled. The data proving his guilt was safely backed up, and a battered sense of relief seeped into the battered staff members who'd survived the ordeal. Still, victory tasted bittersweet. Lena's thoughts remained fixed on Sable, the horse that had pulled her from a cliff and once again shielded her from a fatal bullet. In that silent courtyard under the weary moonlight, she made a silent vow to see Sable again, alive and well, because some debts can never truly be repaid. Dawn broke over the makeshift veterinary center like a hesitant promise. The dusty yard outside was scattered with vehicles, some bearing the emblem of the BTU outpost, others belonging to volunteer rescuers who had driven through the night. Inside the long, low-roofed building, the air smelled of antiseptics, hay, and desert dust. Voices spoke in hushed tones, mindful of the patients, both animals and humans, recovering from the chaos of the cartel attack. Lena Hart hadn't slept. For 12 hours she had remained at Sable's side, refusing any suggestion that she take a break. She sat in a folding metal chair near the corner of a stall labeled Treatment Bay 3, elbows propped on her knees, gaze never leaving the black Mustang lying on a bed of straw. An IV bag hung from a pole, fluid dripping steadily into the horse's vein. A veterinarian in scrubs had sedated Sable enough to stitch up the bullet wound. By some stroke of mercy, or maybe fate, the bullet had only grazed muscle, causing blood loss and shock but sparing vital organs. Every so often, a nurse or a vet assistant would come by to check the horse's vitals, to confirm that Sable's heart rate was steady and that no sign of infection was setting in. But mostly they left Lena alone, respecting the aura of silent vigilance that surrounded her. She'd fended off every well-meaning attempt to get her to eat, to rest, to move. Her body still bore bruises from the fight, and her eyes stung with the dryness of near-constant wakefulness. None of that mattered as much as Sable's condition. Several times through the night, the horse had let out weak whinnies, echoes of pain. Each time, Lena would stroke the Mustang's neck and murmur quiet words of reassurance. She wasn't sure if it helped, but it was all she could offer. The desert had tried to kill her once, and Sable had saved her. The cartel had tried to kill her again, and Sable had stepped in front of a bullet. This war-scarred woman and this wild horse were joined by a bond that words could never quite define. Finally, around the first pink glimmer of dawn, Sable began to stir. Lena, who had been dozing fitfully on the chair with her chin resting on her chest, jerked awake at the rustle of straw. She stood, ignoring the twinge in her ribs, and carefully approached the Mustang. One of the vet assistants peered into the stall from the hallway, eyes watchful. Sable's eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. Lena's breath caught in her throat. The horse lay there, blinking in the harsh overhead light as though trying to remember where it was. For a few seconds, the Mustang's ears twitched nervously, and Lena feared a sudden panic might set in, but Sable did not flail or attempt to leap up. Instead, the horse's gaze landed on Lena. Recognition, or something very close to it, shone in those dark eyes. "It's okay," Lena whispered, voice raw. She stepped nearer, letting the Mustang see her clearly. "I'm here, we're safe." She held out a trembling hand, palm facing up. Sable inhaled her scent, lips quivering. Without warning, Sable eased its head forward, resting its muzzle lightly against Lena's chest. The gesture was all too familiar, an echo of that desperate moment on the cliff when she had lain on the ground, half dead, and Sable had touched her the same way. Lena closed her eyes, choking back a sob. She sank to her knees in the straw, sliding her arms around the horse's neck as gently as she could. "You pulled me back from the edge," she murmured. "I lost my team once, a long time ago, but not this time. I won't lose you." Her words were a promise, spoken more to herself than to the Mustang. Nonetheless, Sable blinked, letting out a quiet huff of breath that warmed Lena's cheek. There was no vow, no contract, but the trust between them had been forged in blood and survival. In that silent stall, with only the faint hum of an IV pump as witness, they reaffirmed a bond stronger than fear. When the vet arrived to check on Sable's vitals, he found Lena still kneeling in the straw, the Mustang's muzzle pressed against her shoulder as though neither intended to move anytime soon. The quiet hush in the stall was reverent, a testament to an understanding that needed no language. Over the following week, the outpost found itself thrust into an intense spotlight. News vans and reporters converged on the edges of BTU territory, hungry for a story that combined betrayal, heroism, and the unlikeliest of rescues. It seemed that every major news outlet was running some version of the headline, "Wild Mustang saves ex-Delta operative from cartel ambush." Horse thwarts cross-border plot, Lena Hart's near-death ordeal. Clips from the station's recovered security cameras circulated widely. Though the footage was grainy, the sequences showing Sable blocking a bullet meant for Lena and aiding in the nighttime defense of the outpost were impossible to ignore. A shaky phone video captured the immediate aftermath, Lena weeping over the wounded horse, refusing to let anyone drag her away. People around the country and soon around the world saw the story as an extraordinary testament to the loyalty of an animal said to be impossible to tame. The Department of Homeland Security wasted no time launching a sweeping investigation into the infiltration. They uncovered that Neil Carver, the outpost supervisor, had been feeding information to a cartel faction for months, possibly years. Under threat or bribery, reports varied. He had helped them identify weak points in patrol schedules, slip contraband through lesser-monitored passes, and falsify records to keep the route open. Though the shock of Carver's arrest and the subsequent revelations rattled the entire organization, it also galvanized a thorough purge of anyone else implicated in the scheme. Dozens of dead-end routes were re-examined, revealing that Carver and his associates had systematically manipulated maps to create blind spots. Some agents found themselves reassigned, others faced suspension or termination. In the end, Carver was charged with a litany of federal offenses, from conspiracy to commit murder to aiding a drug trafficking ring. The once respected supervisor now awaited trial in a high-security facility, his co-conspirators either on the run or behind bars. Amid the storm of media coverage, Lena found herself bombarded with questions. Reporters clamored for interviews, wanting to hear every detail of her cliffside rescue or her time as a Delta Force operative. Photographers tried to snap pictures of her with Sable whenever possible, hoping to capture the now comic imagery of a stoic female veteran and the wild horse that had chosen her. She obliged only a few outlets, speaking briefly about the betrayal and the importance of vigilance within any institution, but more often than not she quietly slipped away. One day, the newly installed commander of BTU, a pragmatic woman named Captain Shelley Howard, summoned Lena to her Spartan office. The window overlooked a dusty courtyard still bearing bullet scars from the recent firefight. Captain Howard motioned for Lena to take a seat, her expression respectful yet firm. "Hey Hart," she began, folding her hands on the desk. "I'll get straight to the point. The higher-ups have noticed your resilience, not to mention the public attention you've garnered. They want to offer you a position in Phoenix, somewhere you'd have a real office, a stable environment, and more security after what you've been through." Lena's posture stiffened. She sensed the subtext. "We want to keep you safe, but also keep you under observation." She inhaled slowly, recollecting how Carver had once coaxed her similarly, offering a desk job that would remove her from field duty. "Let me guess," she replied, voice subdued but unwavering. "It's an advisory role, something with a nice title, good benefits, but miles away from the border, right?" Captain Howard nodded, unruffled. "Yes. You'd be a senior security consultant. High pay, fewer risks. After everything that happened, it might be the best course for you. And, if I may say, you've done more than enough out here." Silence hung in the office. Lena glanced at the cracked window, through which she could see a distant corral where Sable was being kept for ongoing checkups. The Mustang had chosen her not because she was special, but perhaps because the two of them shared a stubborn refusal to let adversity define them. A desk job might feel like a gilded cage for them both. She turned back to Captain Howard. "I appreciate the offer, ma'am, but I can't accept it. I can't see problems from an air-conditioned office that's hundreds of miles away. I need to be out here, meeting the land on its own terms, seeing the truth with my own eyes." Howard exhaled through her nose, disappointment flickering across her face, but also a glimmer of respect. "I figured you'd say that," she admitted, sliding a folder across the desk. "At least take a look at the details before you walk away. The window will remain open if you ever change your mind." Lena nodded. "I'll keep it in mind," she said politely, though deep down she knew she wouldn't budge. The desert had nearly killed her, but it had also brought her something extraordinary. Sable. An ally no one could have predicted. The conversation shifted. Captain Howard told Lena about a photograph that had gone viral, an image of Lena and Sable at sunset, both silhouettes etched against a blazing orange sky. Someone had snapped it from a vantage point near the veterinarian's yard. The media coined it "Two Survivors." Emails and letters poured into the outpost, praising the unstoppable soldier and her loyal Mustang. Many referred to it as a symbol of hope, a living testament to the improbable bonds that form in the harshest conditions. Lena felt ambivalent about the attention. She was no celebrity, nor did she want to be. Still, a small part of her relished the idea that Sable, a once-forgotten Mustang, was inspiring people worldwide to question their assumptions about loyalty, courage, and freedom. It was shortly after turning down the Phoenix assignment that Lena submitted a thin packet of documents to the outpost's internal mailbox. Captain Howard found it on her desk a day later, titled, Proposal, Echo Mustang Recon Unit. At first, Howard thought it was a joke, something her staff might have concocted to poke fun at the continuing presence of Sable, but as she flipped through the pages, her eyebrows lifted in genuine intrigue. Lena's proposal was detailed, explaining how Mustangs possessed unique survival skills in the desert's harsh terrain. Many areas along the border were effectively unreachable by standard vehicles, and drones were limited by battery life, signals, and rough weather conditions. The heart of the proposal hinged on a revolutionary concept. Instead of forcibly domesticating Mustangs, the Border Patrol could partner with them. A small group of volunteers would be trained to work alongside wild horses who, of their own volition, remained near the outpost. Lena argued that mutual respect, rather than a classic model of breaking a horse's spirit, would yield a team capable of navigating remote canyons, rocky passes, and labyrinthine arroyos. "What if they just wander off?" one of the reviewing officers asked during the next day's meeting. Lena shrugged. "Then they wander off. We won't trap them, we won't brand them with ranch irons, and we definitely won't confine them like livestock. If they choose to stay, we ride together. If not, we let them go. This is about forging a real alliance, one built on trust." She explained the name, Echo. It had been the call sign of her Delta Force unit, now long dissolved after their catastrophic final mission. Bringing the name back felt like a small tribute to her fallen comrades, repurposed for a different kind of fight. A fight to protect the border from criminals and corruption, but also to protect something intangible and wild. Some officials scoffed at the idea. Horses, especially wild Mustangs, were notoriously independent, but the evidence of Sable's repeated interventions stood as a powerful counterpoint. If one horse could choose to help a human without being broken or tamed, might there be others? In the end, the proposal got a preliminary green light. Lena was granted a small budget, a modest strip of land near the outpost, and the freedom to do things her way, under the condition that she accept a handful of watchers, including a veterinary consultant, to ensure both the horses and the agent's safety. Word spread fast around the station. Some teased Lena about planning to raise an army of wild Mustangs. Others, who had witnessed Sable's heroics, were intrigued. Even Maria Torres gave a reluctant grin when she heard about the plan. "It's crazy," she told Lena, "but so is just about everything you do. If you need me to sign off on something, you know where to find me." Sable, for its part, remained near the outpost's open corral once it had mostly healed. The gates were left unlocked, the desert free for it to roam. Each night the Mustang would wander a little further, and each morning it would be found standing in the yard, eyes scanning the horizon. Some nights it would vanish entirely, only to reappear days later, as if reconnoitering the land on its own. Eventually, Lena fashioned a simple leather collar for Sable, one with a small, custom-made emblem burned into a strip of tanned hide. The emblem bore the letters Echo, along with a stylized silhouette of a galloping horse set against a crescent moon. It wasn't an official decoration, no congressional honors had been minted for wild Mustangs, but the station staff quietly approved, calling it Sable's well-deserved badge. One breezy afternoon, a handful of agents gathered as Lena carefully slipped the collar around Sable's muscular neck. The Mustang stood still, letting her work, ears flicking with mild curiosity. When Lena stepped back, she found herself smiling, something she realized she didn't do often. "It suits you," she murmured, patting the Mustang's flank. Several agents nearby snapped pictures. The dark collar gleamed like a quiet statement of belonging, yet not captivity. "Look at him," someone whispered, "like a sentinel for the whole desert." "Yeah," another agent answered softly, "he's the Watcher of El Silencio." The name took root immediately, and in no time people around the base took to calling Sable by that moniker. The Watcher, a mythical guardian bridging the worlds of humans and the untamed desert. Over the weeks that followed, Lena and the newly approved Echo Mustang Recon Unit began training protocols with a few other Mustangs that occasionally drifted near the outpost. Most remained skittish, reluctant to approach, but a handful showed mild curiosity, and Lena took great care never to push them into compliance. Amid the renewed sense of hope and purpose, Lena knew that threats still loomed. Cartel members didn't simply vanish because one of their inside men was arrested. Word on the radio suggested a few major players remained at large, and at least one skilled technician had evaded capture. The border still simmered with hidden malice, like a snake coiled among the rocks. But for now she had Sable, a supportive station staff, and a mandate to forge a new path. It was enough to keep her going day after day as the desert heat pressed ever onward. Days stretched into weeks and the outpost settled into a cautious normalcy. Carver awaited trial, the high-profile nature of the case ensuring that no shortage of media coverage accompanied his court proceedings. Lena spent her time refining the Echo Mustang Recon Unit's guidelines, dividing her focus between the horse corral, the station's dusty briefing rooms, and ongoing investigations into the cartel's network. Yet the more they dug, the more they discovered that not all of Carver's associates had been apprehended. One name in particular surfaced repeatedly in partial data logs. A technician rumored to have specialized knowledge of infiltration, sabotage, and forging official documents. The night of the assault, he'd presumably been the one to cut the station's power and jam communications. The camera feed had captured only a fleeting glimpse, a slim figure in dark clothes, features concealed by a scarf and goggles. "I combed through the detainee list," Maria Torres said one afternoon, sitting across from Lena in the outpost's modest cafeteria. She had a tablet in hand, flicking through lines of data. "He's not among those in custody. Looks like he slipped away in the chaos." Lena nodded, swallowing a mouthful of stale coffee. "That means at least one major piece of the puzzle is still out there. A professional saboteur who knows our systems." "Exactly," Maria tapped the screen. "We've also detected an encrypted signal coming from somewhere in the western quadrant of El Silencio. Could be just a leftover device, or he could be regrouping with a smaller cell." Lena sighed. "I doubt they're done. Cartels rarely just give up, especially if they think there's still money to be made, or revenge to be exacted." That afternoon, a newly manned observation post reported another curious sign. Hoofprints, presumably from a horse not bearing the station's brand or a typical ranch mark, had been found near a cluster of boulders in West El Silencio. Some were tagged with reflective paint, a trick used by smugglers to guide nighttime traffic. It brought a chill to Lena's spine. If criminals had learned to use horses to move through the canyons, it might complicate the outpost's efforts to maintain control. Maria set down her tablet, arms crossed. "They're trying to be clever, but we know they're out there. The question is when they'll strike again." Lena agreed. "We have to stay vigilant." She thought of how easily Carver had manipulated her route, nearly killing her in that deserted canyon. Another infiltration on the outpost, especially now that it was partially rebuilt, could be devastating. Or perhaps they aimed to ambush her personally, seeking retribution for Carver's downfall. Still, the station carried on. Agents patrolled the perimeter. The midday sun beat down mercilessly on the corrugated roofs. Sable, fully recuperated, often roamed the outskirts of the base, occasionally disappearing for a day or two into the desert beyond. Lena suspected the Mustang scouted the land in its own way, ever watchful for changes. Yet she also knew no horse, no matter how keen, could stop every hidden threat. Eventually, Lena decided it was only fair that Sable be set free if it so wished. The Mustang had more than earned the right to come and go unimpeded. One morning she approached the open corral where Sable stood gazing at the sunrise. She carried no harness, no bridle. Instead, she slipped the latch that secured the fence, and with a gentle push swung the gate wide. "All right," she said softly, her eyes meeting Sable's. "I've taken too much of your time. If you need to leave, I won't stop you." For a moment, Sable seemed to sense the significance of the gesture. The horse stepped forward, ears pricked, then angled its body and ambled out of the corral. Lena watched with a bittersweet pang as Sable trotted toward the horizon, disappearing into the rocky dunes. She told herself this was how it had to be. She would never trap the creature that had saved her life. Days passed without sight of the Mustang. Lena tried to focus on the Echo Mustang Recon Unit's training. A couple of other Mustangs had lingered around the base, but none displayed Sable's extraordinary willingness to cooperate. Some agents joked that Sable had been a fluke, a one-in-a-million horse. Lena missed it more than she cared to admit, feeling a quiet ache whenever she glanced at the empty corral. Then, one dawn, a thick fog rolled in from the west. A rare occurrence in the desert, it blanketed the outpost in swirling white, swallowing the usual landmarks. A tired guard at the front gate rubbed his eyes, trying to make out silhouettes in the haze. That was when a dark figure emerged, standing as still as a statue in the middle of the yard. "Captain," the guard called into his radio, "we've got "A horse here. Looks like that black Mustang Sable, it's just standing there." Within minutes a small crowd gathered near the entrance. Sure enough, Sable stood unaccompanied, not tethered or led, gazing at the thick morning fog that drifted across the compound. Even from a distance, the horse's stance radiated calm confidence. Lena arrived moments later, stepping through the swirling mist. She and Sable locked eyes, and in that silent exchange she sensed the Mustang's resolve. Slowly, carefully, she approached. Sable didn't back away. It didn't stomp or snort. It simply waited. Maria, having hurried up behind Lena, whispered, "You see that? It's like he knew exactly when to come back." Lena gently reached out, placing a hand on Sable's shoulder. The horse's coat was damp from the fog, tiny beads of moisture sliding down the black fur. A faint heat radiated through Lena's palm. She turned to Maria, a smile tugging at her lips. "Guess he's not done here after all," Lena murmured. It felt like an understatement. Sable had come back of its own volition, as if aware that unfinished business lingered in the desert, that the border was still fraught with hidden dangers. The watchers at the gate exchanged uneasy grins and half-joking remarks about Sable's timing, how the Mustang always seemed to appear right before trouble. "All jokes aside," Maria said softly, "I believe it. This horse knows more than we can fathom." A few yards away, a younger agent commented with a laugh, "Man, that Mustang has a better sense of dramatic entrances than any of us." Smiling, Lena led Sable away from the yard, the horse walking calmly at her side. The morning mist enveloped them both in a shifting shroud. It felt almost ceremonial, as though the desert had given them its own private stage for this reunion. Lena couldn't shake the sense that a silent vow had been renewed. They would face whatever came next, together. Weeks later, the sun rose on another day at the outpost, painting the dunes with a bold palette of orange and gold. The station had largely recovered from the nighttime assault, though bullet scars on certain walls remained as quiet reminders. Carver's trial was underway, the prosecution piling up evidence that ensured he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The cartel's sabotage expert was still at large, but leads trickled in from time to time, fueling the sense that one final confrontation lay ahead. Sable had taken to wandering in and out of the base, never straying long before returning. Lena spent her days balancing Echo Unit training sessions with planning new routes that accounted for the worrisome intel about cartel movements. Maria pitched in wherever possible, dividing her efforts between monitoring the ongoing investigations and supporting Lena's unorthodox Mustang collaborations. One crisp morning, unusual in the scorching desert climate, Lena found herself standing near the perimeter fence, a battered cowboy hat pulled low over her eyes. A pair of worn leather gloves dangled from her belt, the fabric scuffed from repeated training. Behind her, Maria approached, carrying a small canteen of water. "Headed out?" Maria asked, handing Lena the canteen. "I'm guessing you picked up on the chatter from that far west vantage point." Lena took a sip, grateful for the refreshment. "Something's brewing out there, a faint signal or a rumor, hard to say. But I can't shake the feeling it's connected to the leftover cartel presence." She paused, glancing at the horizon. "And if I wait too long, they might vanish again, or get bolder." Maria studied her in silence. They both knew how these story arcs tended to end. The enemy regroups, takes one last shot at revenge or profit. Lena was determined to cut them off first, to prevent any further betrayals or needless bloodshed. "And you're going alone?" Maria ventured gently. Lena tilted her head, a half-smile playing on her lips. "Not exactly." She turned to see Sable emerging from behind a low shed, mane catching the morning light. The Mustang approached at an easy trot, as though it had heard its name. Lena gave Maria a meaningful look. "He's with me." Maria chuckled softly. "Of course he is." In a graceful, practiced motion, Lena patted Sable's shoulder. The horse lowered its head as though inviting her to mount. It had become second nature now, a silent language between them. Lena felt a pang of nostalgia, remembering the first time Sable had knelt to let her climb on, back when she was half dead and desperate. Maria offered Lena a final word of caution: "Be safe out there. And come back." Lena tugged the brim of her hat. "I can't promise safe, but I can promise I'll do my best." Then, with a mischievous grin, she added, "Besides, we haven't finished our work." She swung up onto Sable's back, the Mustang standing steadily beneath her. A couple of watchers near the gate lowered their coffee mugs and waved as Lena guided Sable across the compound yard. No one saluted. It wasn't that kind of formal scene, but there was a collective hush, a respect for the warrior and the horse that had already cheated death together more than once. The desert wind carried the soft hiss of shifting sand. At the threshold of the base, Lena paused, glancing back. A few agents lingered behind the chain-link fence, Maria among them. They all wore expressions that spoke of pride, worry, and acceptance of a story continuing beyond what they could see. "Well," Maria said softly, "there she goes." No more words needed to be exchanged. Lena and Sable turned west, riding toward the uncertain horizon. The rising sun silhouetted them, a single figure astride a wild Mustang, forging into the vast unknown. A swirl of dust and fog lingered around their path, parting to reveal the desert's endless sprawl of dunes and rocky crags. In those final moments, an almost cinematic hush enveloped the outpost. No one could say for sure where they were headed, or if danger lurked just beyond the next ridge. The only certainty was that the border still harbored shadows, and that a guardian was needed to hold them at bay. Lena and Sable carried that mantle now, united by a bond beyond logic or training. As the pair receded into the distance, the camera of an unseen observer might have panned back, capturing the last glimpse of them cresting a distant dune. Then they were gone, swallowed by the shimmering haze of the desert morning. Yet their presence lingered, like an echo in the wind, reminding everyone that in a land so often defined by harsh divides, trust and loyalty could still blossom under the unforgiving sun. No one said a word. The outpost's quiet seemed to hold its breath, as if fully aware that someday that dark horse and the resolute rider would return, or that a new threat might arise requiring their vigilant watch. Until then, the border, the desert, and those who roamed it remained in delicate balance. And somewhere within that balance, Lena Hart, no longer alone, would carry the banner of a promise. They would fight on for as long as it took.
Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us.